Welcome to Planes of Development. We are excited to have you guys here, and I'm joined by the head teachers from all of the levels that we have, from primary to middle school. And the Planes of Development are not something that was unique to Montessori, that she really did a lot of her work based on scientists that worked around her and at her time and that came before her. And she worked with children from around the world and lots of different cultures for decades. So she spent a lot of time really refining her theory on education. And one of the things that she noticed was that children went through humans went through four distinct phases of development, and each phase of development had its own characteristics and its own tendencies within that phase, and she called them planes of development. And so that's what the modern Montessori schools are based on, is that we still use the planes of development. And she even said that they were so strong and particular within each plane of development, that when they went to the next one, that it was like a rebirth, which is kind of a dramatic word. And it reminds us that we, in many ways, have a brand new child. And so because each child is different in each phase of development, in each of the planes of development, the environment needs to be different too. And the adults need to treat that child differently based on their needs. And so what we have is each plane of development is about 6 years, and the first half of it is a time where they're really acquiring a lot of skills, they're absorbing things, they're making a lot of progress. And then the second half of each plane, they're really refining those skills and really working at really kind of assimilating all of the things that they have learned during the first half. And you can see here on the picture that Maria tracked it all the way up to age 24. And then in the, I don't know if this is over, if the faces are over for you guys or just me, I'm going to scoot it over. But you can see that one of the things that is written here is that it says some individuals continue to grow throughout their lives. And I think that that is interesting research that continues on into the progression of a person's whole life, that growth doesn't stop at 24, doesn't stop at 6 or 12 or 18, but that it progresses. But Maria Montessori was really concerned a lot with the first 4 planes, and within that, especially the first 3. And so we have our teachers here, and they're going to tell us about what that looks like in their classroom and some of the characteristics that you will see in your child as your child passes through them. And so I'm going to pass the talk over to our primary teachers.
Yes, and I'll go first, talking about the first plane of development from 0 to 6, and often called, especially by Maria Montessori, but by many people, the most important plane of development, because you only have to look at the difference between a newborn and a 6-year-old to realize the amazing amount of growth that happens during, and the only other time that such a huge change is seen is almost as much a big change is seen as through the high school years. So 0 to 6 is the construction of the person, and it's characterized by things like sensitivity to order, observance of small things, and she kind of does this whole thing calling it the absorbent mind, where they're just soaking up everything. And the interesting thing about this plane is that they're not discriminating about these things. Everything that happens to them 0 to 6 is a formation of their culture, and they're taking everything in. And so it's important that this first plane of development is protected as much as possible. And they kind of do more experimenting and resolving conflicts or hearing about controversies. It's more appropriate for the next plane of development. So in this first plane, it's a lot of, the goal is to give them a lot of good things and expose them to a lot of beauty. So with that, we have the child who love, order, and the environment needs to be prepared in such a way to support that. And they go through these sensitive periods of, you know, language, gross motor, fine motor, a sensitive period for math. They start going from, you know, only they and their moms exist, or their parents exist, to realizing that there are other people. They start engaging in play, and then cooperative play. And the beautiful thing about this age too in Montessori is that when we have the 3 to 6 year olds, they're all stage of development together at different phases. And one of the reasons we have the classroom like that is because the 6-year-old is able to show so much to the 3-year-old because they understand each other in a way that the adult or the teacher can't. So it's one of my favorite things to see is those, you know, 4 and 5 and 6-year-olds welcoming in 3-year-olds and showing them things and the way they light each other up with that. So those are the main characteristics. And then Kristen's going to talk about what we do in the environment because of those particular things for their playing.
So when it comes to the how we prepare, we have the prepared environment, which is extremely important. And as Dr. Montessori said, she said the first aim of the prepared environment is as far as it is possible to render the growing child independent of the adult, which means that our classroom is set up not for the adults in the classroom, but for the children. So everything's at their level, it's available to them. You know, the furniture in the class is child size, the tables, chairs, sinks, shelves, if you have all noticed, are not at our level. And then the works on the shelves are also organized from left to right, the easiest to most complex. And this organizes the materials in a pattern that prepares the child then for the orientation when the reading skills that emerge. The children also have a freedom within the environment, within reason. Montessori also said there is only one basis for observation, that the children must be free to express themselves and thus reveal those needs and attitudes which would otherwise remain hidden or repressed in an environment that did not permit them to act spontaneously. So we're there to support them in incidences if there are things that spill. Like, it's not, oh my gosh, it's this huge, big deal. You'll notice the children, if there's a huge spill, all the children in the class a lot of times will come over and say, and I hear it constantly, oh, let me help you with that. It's not a big deal. And then we also have in the, what we call the stages of normalization, which you'll get in the beginning stages when the child just enters the classroom. And like Kathleen was talking about, seeing those 3 to 6 year olds, you know, you have those 3-year-olds that are at the level of entering and they're just kind of everywhere. And then those 6-year-olds that are kind of like the guides for them as well. But we also have the opportunity for the role of the teacher. And the role of the Montessori teacher is as an observer, whose goal is to intervene less and less as the child develops. They're not the center of attention in the classroom. They are a guide for the children. The Montessori teacher prepares the environment for the child so that it helps promote independence. She models a calm and a pace that allows concentration and reverence. Often there are deviations in the classroom, such as interrupting, leaving work before it's completed, or the misuse of a material. Ways that the teacher helps is to model the desired behavior, inviting the deviant child away from the concentrating child by giving the child a gentle redirection through lessons that connect them with the environment. So the biggest thing is for us as the guide to connect them with the environment, and that's our go-to. As Dr. Montessori said, the greatest sign of success for the teacher, thus transformed, is to be able to say, the children are now working as if I did not exist. So everything, there's a routine for the structured environment. We have the 3-hour work cycle. Everything just kind of ebbs and flows, and the kids know that they're loved, safe, secure, because you've connected them with the environment, as well as giving them that independence so that they know if they make a mistake, it's okay, and that we are there. And then we go into the next plane of development, which Miss Wells will start.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Then come to me at age 6. And it's important, I'm going to say this first, that the second plane of development is a stabilizing plane. So if you think about children going from 0 to 6, there's so much happening to them physically, mentally, they're absorbing everything. And then the second plane is really, it's more calm, tend to slow down a bit. They're going through a lot of physical growth. Their bones are getting longer, their teeth are falling out. They may lose their kind of rounded baby features. But they're not going through such a drastic physical change as they did from birth to age 6. They're not going through a tumultuous hormonal change like they will in adolescence. It's really a relatively calm period overall. So physically, they're bigger, they're stronger, they're more daring, they get bruised, but they're also a little more likely to get off and just keep playing. They have tons of energy. They want to test their body and their limits. This is the age of climbing trees and jumping off rocks and seeing what happens. So time outdoors and movement in general is super important to this age. We start our day with 20 to 30 minutes outside with unstructured time. At midday, they have 45 minutes to either run around and play, usually imaginary games, or they can join in with a large group game, an organized game like Capture the Flag or something like that, where they work as a team. In the classroom, we allow for this need for movement by having freedom of movement through the classroom, flexible seating. They can choose to work while they're sitting on the floor. They can sit at a table, they can stand, whatever they need physically in that moment is okay. Also kind of related to the physical aspect, 6 to 9-year-olds lose that sense of order that Kathy and Kristen were talking about. They no longer have an external sense of order. It starts to become internal for them. And what we see on the outside is more messy and clumsy and less inclined to line things up neatly and, more likely to just cluster their materials together. And it can be challenging as an adult to observe this, but for the child, the added expectation of having to line things up perfectly can be a deterrent or a distraction from the work that they're trying to do. So it's important, that we step back and kind of let them do it their way, within reason. So moving on to sort of mental change or psychological change, the 6 to 9-year-old child, or 6 to 12, I should say, these are the children who you're hearing why, how. They're curious about everything. They want to know how the world works and where they come from. And coinciding with this increased curiosity is the ability to imagine. And so they can now picture, beyond the space around them. So they can travel through time and space in their imagination, which allows us to tell them stories that takes them outside of their own environment. So Montessori's solution to this need for the second play child to understand everything is something called cosmic education, which the first time I heard it sounded a little woo-woo, but it's not cosmic like woo, it's giving them the entirety of the cosmos. So this is the time to present them with everything, and then encourage them to sort of pursue that which interests them the most. So we tell them stories right at the beginning of the year. We tell them a series of stories about the Big Bang, about the coming of life on Earth, about the coming of humans, the development of writing, the development of math. And through these great stories, we pursue topics of interest like dinosaurs or types of cells, volcanoes, early humans, vertebrates, invertebrates, calligraphy. I mean, anything that you can connect back to these tales that are usually very exciting lessons for the kids. So I have this quote from Maria Montessori, which I love. It's from her book, To Educate the Human Potential. She says, "The task of teaching becomes easy, since we do not need to choose what we shall teach, but should place all before him for the satisfaction of his mental appetite." So coming from a traditional environment years ago, we have curriculum and standards, and this is what we teach this year, and next year, this is what we teach. And I love this idea that we're able to really present in an unlimited viewpoint. Like, yes, we have standards, we know what the minimum is, but we're not limited in terms of how much of that we can teach or how much more. So the last thing I wanted to share about second plane children, and I'm sure that Michelle will go into this too, but the second plane child is very, very social. If you have a 6 to 9-year-old, you probably know this already. They have a much greater interest in their peers and the community at large. So they're looking to familiarize themselves with group rules. They're more interested in fitting in and learning how to resolve conflict. They tend to form little packs and herds and micro societies within the school community. They love to make up their own languages and codes and things that kind of allows them to be part of a special group together. This is the time for group projects. They love finding things that they're interested in together. It's not uncommon to see 2 or 3 children debate which animal or category of animals they all want to research together. One person might say penguins and one might say tigers, and then they settle on koalas because they all have a mutual interest in koalas, and it's more important to them to work together than pursue their individual interest at that age. So this interest in other people also extends outside of the classroom. There's much more of an awareness of culture, and they want to know more about the community that they're a part of. So that can be their town, the state of Maine, it can be their country, or it can be the world. So it's also the perfect time to teach them more about their own culture, expose them to traditions and cultures that they're less familiar with. And in non-COVID times, as much as possible, we like to get them out of the school and experiencing those things in person because A, they're active, and B, it's the best way to learn about all that. So that's my piece. And I just was thinking about looking at a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old and thinking how different they may look physically, but recognizing that they're mentally, psychologically, they're all kind of at the same point together. And it is such a beautiful thing to see the friendships that blossom between a first grader and a third grader who have a shared interest in Spider-Man, or a second grader and a third grader, a second grader and a first grader who are really passionate about the Titanic, and they want to research all the things about the Titanic and teach us about them. So, and they balance each other's strengths, right? One may be a reader, one may be a drawer, an illustrator, and they find ways to work together, and it's lovely. And then we hope that they've learned enough together, and we send them on up to Upper L with Michelle.
So upper elementary, the 9 to 12-year-old age group, is part of the same plane of development as lower elementary, but where the first half of the plane of development is more of the, absorbing, growing new skills thing. The second half is the settling phase, where everything that they've been learning sort of starts to fully become a part of who they are. So a lot of things stay the same in upper L, but it gets just more solidified. So just like in lower L, 9 to 12-year-olds, their strength is increasing. They need a lot of activity. So we have the same kinds of things: free movement in the classroom, outdoor time in the morning, in the middle of the day, in the afternoon. We really encourage cooperative games during recess and games like that, just to get them moving. But we also increase the level of, for like classroom chores, instead of just within the classroom. Once you get to upper L, the kids start doing classroom chores for the school as a whole, which ties in with the, increasing awareness of the community as well. So they're not just doing work in their own classroom, they're doing work for the school. Also at this age is when sleep patterns start to become more like the typical adolescence. Their brain doesn't quite wake up as early in the morning as it did when they were 5, 6, 7. So we like to start the day with kind of low-key activities that don't require 100% of their brain power, because it's not all there yet. And just like that, this is also the time where puberty kind of gets going, which is one of actually the ideal things about a multi-age classroom, because it lets the kids get more comfortable with the idea of how bodies change, how bodies are different, because they see it all around them. It's not as scary about what's going to happen because, the person at the next desk is going through puberty. And so if you go through it the next year, you know what it's going to be like. Intellectually, academically, this is the sort of age of reason. These are when they really start to learn how to question, learn how to think. And so we do a lot of research-based projects, finding out things about the world, asking questions, finding the answers, that kind of thing. They still really need the concrete connection. We still use a lot of materials in the upper L, but in the 9 to 12 age group, they're able to move more quickly from concrete to abstract, and they're more likely to get sick of repetition and want to move on more quickly. So there's also a lot of project-oriented learning as well that connects in with the reasoning. So that's where, our projects like Mystery History, Cultural Day, year-long, all that kind of stuff gets involved because it gives them a connection to the community. It gets into their personal interests. It's group work, collaborative thinking, and it engages all of these reasoning skills that they're creating. Socially, as Allie said, second plane kids are very social. This is the point where really their peers become way more important than the adults in their life. This is the point where they don't need mom and dad anymore. They don't care as much about what the teacher has to say. They want to know what, the kid at the next table over is thinking. So there's a lot of group work, a lot of collaboration, but there's also a lot of learning conflict management skills and things like that. This is another great reason to have the mixed age and mixed ability grouping, because it allows them to have a wide range of people to connect with through this part of their lives. Also, in related to the conflict management, the second half of the second plane, this is a lot of times where the sense of right and wrong and the sense of fairness and justice begins to be created. So wanting to learn not just about what are the rules here, but what are the rules elsewhere, and are they fair? That's a big thing, is it fair? Is it fair? And so this is a great time to be looking into the world and justice and injustice in the wider world and not just the school community. At the same time as they have this sort of increasing importance of peers, and the onset of puberty means that it's also the time where they start to pay more attention to people looking, thinking, acting, being different. And so this is a great time to show them the wide diversity of the world and of the people around them to help them become more comfortable with the world in general. As they become more independent, they're able to, research and find more things on their own. This is also sort of back and forth. There's a time of great drama. They become a lot more dramatic, but at the same time, they need a lot more me time. So there's a lot more research presentations where they do, present information that they found to the class. There's a lot more, storytelling, author circle kind of thing, but we also make sure to include a lot of time for self-reflection so they can balance both sides of their needs at this time. And then they head on to SAM in middle school.
Okay, and it is in middle school where some of the tumultuous things that Michelle started to talk about really start to catch fire. And this graphic of the 4 planes is oftentimes color-coded in 2 different colors, where the first and third plane is in like a red or a bright color, because the immense growth and change that happens in that 0 to 6-year-old is reflected again in the 12 to 18-year-old. And unlike the second plane with the elementary students, where it is a little bit more calm and there's a less drastic developments and changes going on, that 12 to 18-year-old is often compared to the 0 to 6-year-olds with the amount of changes that we see happening. And the piece that's a little different in our school, our middle school is just 7th and 8th graders. And when Montessori designed these multi-age classrooms, she actually put 7th, 8th, and 9th graders together. And some of you who have maybe been through your adolescence or have parented teenagers might kind of understand why that is, in that really those, freshman year, those 14-year-olds, they're still climbing that initial tumultuous time of the adolescence. And it's not until that kind of get over that hump of that 15, as you start to head into that 16, 17, 18, that they're on that second side where they're kind of rebuilding and they're starting to calm down a little bit and get ready to mature into adulthood. And so she ideally set that up so that then, the secondary, or what we now call the high school, would just be that 10th, 11th, 12th grade, or those 16 to 18-year-olds. So a little bit of a difference there. So the middle school students in most Montessori schools, most public schools, very traditional in the United States, where there's just that 7th, 8th, maybe you've got a 6th, 7th, 8th junior high, but they're probably not in the same classroom at that point. And although you do start to see, as Michelle mentioned, some beginnings of puberty in the very end of that upper L period, they are solidly in it once they are getting into that adolescence and into middle school. And this is one of the other reasons that this is compared to that first plane, with the amount of change and growth that's happening. So there's an immense amount of physical changes that go on with puberty, a lot of mental, psychological, all of that, and is really a true kind of rebirth into this kind of second stage of life here. One of the other really interesting things that Montessori talks about, and that our school really tries to focus as much as possible on, is that this group of children and the adolescents, Montessori referred to as the earth children, or the Erdkinder, and talks a lot about how important the connection for adolescents to the earth, but more than just like environmental, the actual like working of the earth and using their hands and being physical with that type of labor and that type of growing and connecting to, how things grow, how things work, how machines and all of that works, in connection with then, the head, the actual academics inside the classroom. So it's really important in our curriculum that those two things are both happening. And Shanali, if you want to switch forward to the needs, a lot of what you're seeing in an adolescent and what they need. So in the second plane, they're starting to become more social and independent around their socialization. And in the adolescence, they, that breaking apart from the parents and that social independence becomes really critical, because that's not a time that they just build kind of their own, friendships and connections, but where they start to realize how they're going to fit within the world, and what is their place. They really need to be given personal responsibility. We start that at a young age in lots of different levels, and really try to grow that even more with our adolescents, whether it be in the school, as far as, taking care of the environment and the classrooms in the school, but also taking care of, their own academics and their own planning and their own, homework and scheduling and whatnot. We also work a lot with economic independence. And that's one of the first times that you see economics in that way in Montessori's work. And that's why you'll see our students out, selling their greens or managing money and looking at how
business works? How does economy and the need for that type of a interaction with others and with the world work? They really need to have meaningful and challenging work. An adolescent that doesn't see their assignments or what they're being asked to do as meaningful is not going to connect with them. They're not going to be able to, move forward with that. And it's a really important piece of the guide is creating those opportunities for the students. They need a lot of opportunities for leadership. This is where that aspect of their kind of being really starts to grow. The space to be creative still. And so, it can't become too constricted to, the academics and, a curriculum that doesn't allow that exploration for creativity to still happen. And they have, because one of the similarities to that first plane where you see the toddler and, the young child needing order and that type of structure, we see that again with the adolescent. So, an 11, 12-year-old in the end of upper L who might be super organized with their binder, always know where their things are, like have everything neat and organized, that will often fall apart as they enter the adolescent phase and into the middle school. And so they really need those structures put back into place around them so that they can kind of relearn their own sense of order and their own sense of schedule and routine and structure. And it's another very sensitive period for that type of growth and development with those executive functioning skills. And all aspects of, what we do in the classroom and at the school, we really try to keep all of these things in mind, whether it be, the actual academic topics and assignments that are being done, having class meetings where the students are still working on those deep connections and all of those conflict resolution and the different types of routines that they worked on as when they were younger, to art and seminars, having weekly checklists, doing specific group lessons, working with the younger students within the school so that they learn and can experience some of that place within, the wider community, and really trying to work at all aspects of finding, their needs. And then lastly, the kind of fourth plane of the development, they've left us here at the school and, they've moved out onto the real world and adulthood. And like Shaunalee said at the very beginning, even though the kind of documentation of the graphic looks to end at 24, there's a lot of research that shows that quite a lot of development for a lot of people can still happen after that. Even 25, 26 and further on. And so to just remember that maturity and that brain development doesn't stop right at 18 when you hit that adult label. Cool.
Right. So I thought that this quote would be a nice one to end on. It's also important to note that while the teachers were talking, it was really easy to see how each plane builds upon the previous plane. And so whatever they're doing currently, they're building the skills and the attributes and the characteristics for who they will become. And that is one of Maria Montessori's focuses, is that she really thought that education was about building the human that they would become. So when you work with children, you're really working with their future self, which is really powerful. And it's a task that that we don't take lightly, and it's a really honorable one, and it's a really special one to work with those children. and knowing that during each plane they're different from the one before and the one to come, and it's really neat to see them go through the stages. My own son is 18, and so he's going to be entering the next phase soon, and it's been very amazing and fascinating to see him go through all of those phases. And I am excited for our parents who have very young children to watch them go through the different phases themselves and to experience that with them. And so I think that it would be nice to open it up to questions right now. And also I want to say that it's good to, if you're interested in this, to continue to research it, because this is really just the tip of the iceberg. This is a very, expansive body of research that Montessori did, and you could do a lot of reading about it, and it is fascinating. So if you're interested, definitely look into it on your own. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we can do questions.
There is actually in the Absorbent Mind, she talks extensively about the 0 to 3 stage and the important things. And it's actually super beautiful in that book, where she talks about things like the caregiver of that 0 to 3-year-old child, like really disciplining themselves for the benefit of the child. And so talking all the time and singing to them, and instead of putting them in a stroller and taking them for walks, making sure that you're taking a walk that they can take and they have time to stop and stare at the bug forever, and she talks about, so 0 to 6 is what's called kind of one of the split planes. So 0 to 3 and 3 to 6, so they're in the same plane, but radically different things are happening and slightly different needs are being expressed. And so there is different principles for that 0 to 3 that start to change, for the 3 to 6, but they're all related and kind of building on each other. So toddler programs, they're becoming more and more popular around the country. We unfortunately don't have one, but I think it's all one of our big dreams that someday we will. But there's a lot of research and a lot of stuff out there for that 0 to 3 stage, which I can send you if you're interested in any of it.
And it is definitely a dream to have a toddler program at the school.
There are also a few, not very many, but a few Montessori high schools as well. Oh, of course, my dog starts barking as soon as I unmute. I actually, this summer when I was taking courses, was working with a guy who had been involved in a brand new Montessori high school in Ohio. And so there's, I want to say, less than 30 in the country Montessori high schools. There's not very many at all, but they do exist.
Yeah, so the training actually for Montessori, so I'm actually trained for 7th grade through 12th grade. And so it's not that we're starting a high school anytime soon, but it very much is at least in the AMS community for Montessori, there is a high school. A lot of my training actually took place at a high school. Like Michelle mentioned, for kind of by default, because some of the biggest proponents of Montessori middle and high school secondary happen to be based out of Cincinnati, Ohio. That's where the most Montessori high schools are in the Ohio area. And it's definitely something that's growing. Some of the big farm schools out in the Midwest and then down in Pennsylvania as well go all the way up through 12th grade. And there's actually colleges that are even based off of a lot of kind of the Montessori principles, where the students, not children at that point, but the students are designing and having a lot of say in the curriculum and the way that it works. College of the Atlantic in Acadia is very much based off of that principle.
And the high schools, the Montessori high schools, are often boarding schools because Montessori and then Mario, her son, observed that The older teenagers still needed guidance, but they were in a phase of their life where they were in the process of emotionally and psychologically kind of turning away from their parents and that going through like a separation, and having other adults around and having a supportive, inclusive environment for them allowed them to both get guidance and separate appropriately at the same time. And it's found to sometimes lessen things like rebellion and that sort of thing, because they're getting the need for separation and independence met in a really appropriate, healthy way. And the idea is to surround them with adults that are really, really good role models that can be there for them and show them about life. And then the idea is also then that they will form a stronger connection with their own parents because they don't feel that need as much to sort of rebel. Well, so part of it is just that we don't have the students really for it, because high school around here starts in ninth grade. And so that's what most people choose because it's an inclusive, it's 9 to 12. And so families wanted to have their children start when that started. In areas that include sixth grade, back in Montana where I'm from, they started to include sixth grade in their middle school program, which happened partway through my school experience. And what happened was that the sixth grade, the upper elementary, started to kind of trickle off because that school only went up to sixth grade. But when sixth grade got included with the middle school and public school, that's when families wanted to matriculate out, just so that they could feel like they were part of that whole program. So that's why it just sort of logistically makes sense. There's, also it's a little bit of a smaller room up there, but I would love to include those ninth graders. Logistically, it's a little bit weird in this area.
Yeah, there just wouldn't be that draw. And in a lot of places that I've seen, some of the high schools that do succeed and the middle schools that have that ninth grade inclusive, they often have a 7th to 12th grade building. So they're working off of a bigger building where they actually leave this, the original Montessori school after that 6th grade year, and then the middle school and high school is together. Oftentimes that's a space thing, but that sometimes helps to eliminate that need or that feeling that, oh, well, the other schools around have that division between the 8th and 9th, because they're not going anywhere. They're in the same place for the full 6 years rather than 3 and 3, or needing to move in the middle.
So we actually have, even in now, we're starting to get back to not just lower and upper, but having upper, lower, and middle, like kind of come down to the primary level. So you get that whole cohesive thing. And it's great to see the relationships between the primary and the middle school, or the primary with like the lower L when they see their friends. And the same thing with the upper elementary. It's great to see them. You see those natural, bonds. Having worked as an assistant in the upper L, we did have reading buddies the year that I was the assistant up there, and we paired each student with one lower elementary student to kind of come up, and they would work either with reading or math. And it was great. It just gives that sense of community. So last year we couldn't do it at all with the potting, but this year we've slowly started that again, which has been really helpful and wonderful. Like, I know my students loved the other day, one of the middle schoolers came down, and not only did my students love it, I loved it, because I could say, hey, why don't you show them this? And they're more excited to show their, the other students what they're working on, and be like, ooh, I can give you a lesson in how to do this. Because even though this one student that came down, she's been there since primary, she couldn't remember the work, which was great. And so I was like, "Ooh, maybe you can give them a lesson in how to do it." And that kind of boosted, my students' confidence in like, "Oh, okay." And then it was, "Oh, I remember this." So it is, I mean, we do that. And it's slowly coming back. And it's wonderful to see. You just see that community building between all of the classrooms and the different levels as well.
Yeah, I'll second that. We've had, I think we're slowly working our way back up to it right now. So we've had some upper L's come down to work with the kiddos. And just the other day, we had 2 middle schoolers come over, and that was very exciting. The kiddos that I partnered them with had lower productivity mornings. And as soon as the middle schoolers showed up, they were like, "Oh, I got this whole plan. Let's do the plan together, right? I'm going to read to you. We're going to do math together." And it was, it's that they're so motivated by that, the social piece and connecting with the older students. So it's great.
And thank you to everybody who's watching this afterwards. It's really neat to be able to do things on Zoom and record them so that you can watch them whenever you would like, and rewatch them if you would like. So if you're watching this and you have any questions, then you can ask any of the teachers. You can ask me. All of the teacher contact information is on our website. So if one of the primary teachers said something that sparked your interest, or one of the other teachers, you can ask them directly about their classroom and the plane of development that they prepare the environment for. So yeah, that would be wonderful. I hope that we get lots of questions, and I hope that lots of people watch this. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.